When this sewage worker was tasked with solving a sewer clog, he expected a simple, routine job. Stewart worked for one of the largest sewer draining companies in town. But when he received reports of entire city blocks being pestered by blocked drains, he had no choice but to check underground. A sizable greenish obstacle was clogging up one of the main tubes. After about 30 additional minutes, the water finally drained fully. It was an inflatable expansion device used for repairing broken parts of sewage pipes. What if this particular expansion unit isn't used to support broken pipes? The phone operator was intrigued and surprised by Stewart's call for help, and immediately agreed this situation needed to be investigated. He would send the 3 nearest officers to Stewart's location. They will arrive shortly. Officers Stevens, Wattle, and Santiago were already waiting on him when Stewart arrived at his truck. The sewage worker didn't hesitate and told the officers to follow him. As Stewart guided them down, he explained the situation, but the officers were still surprised to see the cause of the blockage and immediately started their investigation. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming stories. It didn't take long for the officers to agree this situation was weird. This was clearly placed here by someone for some reason. We should try to remove it, Officer Stevens, whose name was Tricia, said some unknown factors were at play because they didn't know when the device was placed or for what reason. Those were also why Stewart agreed that the blockage needed to be removed. Stewart and the officers carefully tried to loosen the device. It was a meticulous and time-consuming task, but slowly they made some progress. When there was a big enough gap, Stewart instructed the officers to halt and used a device to measure the water pressure. Tricia asked with a mixture of confusion and worry in her voice. The sewage worker explained the water pressure on the other side of the blockage was very low. Surprised by this discovery, the group stood in silence, trying to process the situation. Then Officer Wattle spoke. "I can only think of one reason someone would put up multiple blockades. We need to find out what is going on and who is behind this." The group removed the inflatable blockade as fast as possible and ventured into the sewer system. Stewart measured the water pressure behind the obstacle, and it was very low. Under Stewart's guidance, the group ventured further and further, and eventually something changed. They kept hitting blockades, but they were set up at junctions. They were blocking one way but leaving the other open. Stewart noticed the pipes were getting cleaner and drier as they walked. Stewart's body froze when he heard them, and he looked at the officers with fright in his eyes. "I can get you a signal," he said, hoping they would still call for backup. If he remembered correctly, there was a manhole nearby. The female officer gestured for him to show them the way, but as they continued their journey, the ominous sounds only seemed to get louder. "We're almost there," Stewart said with a slight tremble in his voice. The eerie noise was getting on his nerves, and he started to regret agreeing to guide the officers. The sewer pipe suddenly widened into a vast and spacious chamber, but that wasn't the surprising part. Stewart knew about the room as they had to cross it to get to the manhole. "This wasn't here before," Stewart whispered, stating the obvious. Hesitant and carefully, the group entered the chamber. Their eyes were wide open as they looked around and noticed that electrical wires were broken open and connected to the devices. "It's some sort of observation post," Tricia said in disbelief when she arrived beside Stewart. The discovery floored the group. They all knew the blockades were placed for a reason, but none expected it to be for this. Someone wouldn't do this with good intentions. So we need to figure out who is behind this and what their plans are before they can act on them, Tricia said before assigning everyone a quarter of the room to search. "Look at this," Officer Wattle suddenly exclaimed after a few minutes. Within no time, the entire group surrounded the desk Wattle was standing at. A small monitor displayed city footage, but everyone ignored it as they looked at the documents and files lying out in the open. Stewart watched Tricia quickly scan the files, and her eyes widened with each page she turned. "It all makes sense now," Tricia whispered, disbelief drenched in her voice. But she quickly recovered and returned to her leadership role. She grabbed her portable phone and was glad she had a signal, probably due to all the wiring gathered in this area. But before she could send a message, the group suddenly heard footsteps approaching quickly. The group entered the chamber from the other side, from where Stewart and the officer had come, so they passed very close by the stack of monitors Stewart and Tricia were hiding behind. "Yes, it should be, but I will do one final check," another person responded. Stewart could feel Tricia tense up after that comment, and the worker realized why. They had removed 2 blockades, and the group was about to discover that, which would be disastrous. There was no saying that the group was complete or others had yet to arrive. they had to at least wait for the one that just left to return. Still, there was no way for the officers to communicate with each other without the people hearing it. Sweat broke out and he tried his best to remain calm, but slowly panic took control of his body. Trisha gestured for him to stay quiet. "I will take care of this clearly." These people were planning some criminal activities, as they continued their conversation about jewelry stores and banks. But then suddenly one of them exclaimed that they had to be complete before going over the final plan. Until the man Stuart and Trisha presumed was Roger came with a panicked look on his face. "There's something wrong. One blockade has been destroyed and another has been moved." The criminals stood up from their seats and moved toward Roger for an explanation. When the group of criminals gathered at the same spot, Stuart was startled by Trisha's voice. "Now!" she yelled as she suddenly came out of her hiding place and gestured for her other officers to follow. Stuart stared at the scene with wide eyes. He was very nervous as the criminals were with double the amount of people as the officers. But the officers were well equipped and had the element of surprise on their side. The man called Roger was probably already on edge when he noticed the blockades had been tampered with and reacted very quickly when the officers appeared. He ran into a pipe Stuart knew would lead to the exit of the sewers. Stuart guided Trisha toward the exit, but when they arrived, they saw it was barricaded off by a police unit arresting Roger. They had set up around the sewers when Trisha signaled for backup, because after the arrests were made, the police finished the investigation and figured out exactly what the criminals were planning, and the media closely followed the trial. The group was planning to rob multiple jewelry stores and banks across the city at the same time by using the sewer system. The criminals created a clear path through the sewage system by blocking off certain pipes, for which they used inflatable repairing devices they had stolen from one of the sewage companies. They could use that path to move quickly and unseen through the city, while stealing from the jewelry stores and banks above the sewer system. Luckily, the criminals' plans were thwarted by Stuart and the police officers who were first responders to the call. Through their teamwork and instinct that something huge was at play, they managed to ensure the city's safety.